You know, there was an incredible conversation, right? It was called A Rap on Race, and it took place in 1970. And you can get it in the library. Well, it's called Rap on Race. You can get it in the library, right? Oh my God, right? You can get it in the library. It was between Margaret Mead and James Baldwin. Right? Margaret Mead was one of the great thinkers and fierce feminist and fierce original, right, creator, right? And James Baldwin, right, who was one of the great poets of the century and who spoke the story of Black pain, having a conversation, right, on the stage, right, in New York City, right. It's an incredible conversation, and I want to just share with you, you know, one piece because it's unbelievably important. So they're having this conversation, and they're talking about, you know, is there collective guilt? And it's a really important question. It's a really important question, right? Are we right? Are we guilty? Let's say. Right? I'm going to put it in the most stark terms. Kirsten, right, who's the executive director of our organization, is German. I'm Jewish. My whole family, right, almost all of my family was gassed in the Holocaust. Is Kirsten responsible for it? The answer is no. It's a simple answer. No. No. The answer is no. Right? And I want to get that straight. Right? There's never been a moment in my mind, not even a second, since I met Kirsten 11 years ago in Berlin, it never entered my body for a split second that Kirsten was somehow responsible for the gassing of my family. We're a few generations later. We're talking about an intergenerational trauma beyond imagination. Kirsten has zero responsibility for it. It has nothing to do with her. She wasn't alive then, right? She wasn't at the gas chambers, right? She stands in her life for everything that's opposed to Nazism, right? She's holding a deep frame of wisdom and outrageous love, and I'm proud to walk with her in the world, right? That's really important. There's not collective guilt for all Germans today, and there's not collective guilt, as both Margaret Mead and James Baldwin agreed. They went back and forth, and it was a hard conversation. And there's a moment in which James Baldwin wants to introduce this notion, right, of collective guilt, right? And then they agree, no, there can't be collective guilt. Right? Baldwin agrees with Margaret Mead, right? But he says, I think there can be responsibility for what happens, says Margaret Mead, right? Right? And responsibility in a certain sense, you know, Margaret Mead, that's good guilt. It's a nonsensical term. And Baldwin says, yeah, I know what you mean. It's useful guilt, right? And then she says, right? She says, no, let's agree on responsibility, says Margaret Mead, right? It is saying I'm going to make an effort to have things changed, but I can't take responsibility for something that was done by others, right? And Baldwin and Mead go back, and Mead tells this story, and they come down and they agree on this notion of collective, right? Of this, that we got to take responsibility today for what we can do, but it's not collective guilt. Those are two different things, right? You can't shame white America into guilt the same way you can't shame Germany into guilt. What we can do is all of us take responsibility today for the world that we inherited. That's something else. I want to read you a story that Margaret Mead tells James Baldwin, and he loves the story and the respect between them, and the story is unbelievable. I mean, it's gorgeous, right? And she's explaining, right, how she came across this notion that we can't adopt the old religious idea that we're defined by blood and race. And therefore, the Black race is responsible. The German race is responsible. The white race is responsible. The brown race is responsible. No. We've got to actually move in that sense beyond race. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about this, but just hear this. It's an incredible story. Mead says, I was walking across the Wellesley campus where she was teaching, right, with my 4-year-old who was climbing pine trees instead of keeping up with me. And I said, you know, Margaret Mead says, I said, you come down out of that pine tree, you don't have to eat pine needles like an Indian. So my 4-year-old comes down, you know, and my 4-year-old says to me, this is Margaret Mead talking, she says, why do the Indians have to eat pine needles? And so she says, Margaret Mead says, I said, to get their vitamin C, because they don't have any oranges. And my daughter said, why don't they have any oranges? And then I'm now going to speak in first person as Margaret Mead did, right? Then I made a perfectly clear technical error. I said, because the white man took their land away from them. And my daughter looked at me and she said, "Am I white?" And I said to her, "Yes, you're white." And my daughter said, "But I didn't take their land away from them. I don't like it to be taken," she shouted. Wow. Right. And Margaret Mead, right, said, right, and that's when I realized, right, we don't do collective guilt. And Margaret Mead was an anthropologist, right, and right, she says there's been millions of crimes committed against humanity, millions. Now, why is one crime more important than another? And James Baldwin says, no, my point precisely is that one crime is not more important than another, and that all crimes must be atoned for. And then Mead says, but when you're talking about atonement, right, you're talking about, what are you talking about? You're talking about, right, people who weren't born when this was committed, right? And Baldwin says, no, I mean recognition of where one finds oneself at what time in history. And they go back and forth, right? And then, right, and just listen carefully, right? Mead says, is the blood of someone who's dying in Burma today on your hands? And James Baldwin says, yes, yes. And Margaret Mead says, I won't accept it, I will not. Then Baldwin says, for whom the bell tolls, it means everybody's suffering is mine. That's beautiful. And then Margaret Mead says, yes, everyone's suffering is mine, but not everyone's murdering. And that's a different point. I will accept everyone's suffering. I don't distinguish for one moment whether my child is in danger or a child in Central Asia, but I will not accept responsibility for what other people do because I happen to belong to that nation or that race or that religion. I do not believe in guilt by association, right? And in the end, right, right, like, wow, they come together, and and this is what they agree on. And it's so gorgeous. I want to invite everyone to read this. It's a treasure. It's an undiscovered treasure, Rap on Race, between Margaret Mead and James Baldwin. And I want to go deeply with me here for a second, okay? Go deep here for a second, okay? Go deep. You know, one of the things that my colleague, Sam Harris, said that I cited, he said, you know, race is like hair color. We got to completely move beyond race. And that's exactly half right and half wrong. Now, going to stay with me clearly here, okay? And this is it's very deep and it's subtle. We have to actually do sense making. It's absolutely true that we have to be, as Martin Luther King said, we have to be in the content of our character and not the color of our skin. That's absolutely true. So, for example, in Judaism, which is my original lineage, and today I'm Jewish and I'm Buddhist and I'm Christian and I'm Indian and I'm Native American, but my original lineage, it is Jewish, and we can be dual citizens from our original lineage and other lineages. That's a very deep idea. We can be dual citizens in the world, right? It's a deep idea, right? And just feel that, right? But actually, and there's this deep idea of duality all over the place. James Baldwin pointed out that most blacks in America are descended from whites and blacks, right? We had a president, Barack Obama, right, who was born of a marriage between white and black. We're all, right? It's all much more complicated. The notion of there is no pure race, right? But we understand the idea that Martin Luther King talked about, right? Which is the content of our character, not the color of our skin. And I understand what my colleague Sam Harris was saying when he said, okay, race has got to be hair color. Right? We get that, okay? We get that. That's deep and that's big and that's good, okay? Yeah, but not quite enough. And Black Lives Matter is actually sensing something right? There's something right, which is, no, actually, I can actually be universal. I can actually understand all lives matter. That's absolutely true. Anyone who would deny all lives matter is a blithering idiot. And I can't even have a conversation with that person. Of course, all lives matter. And within all lives matter, Black Lives Matter. And I actually have an identity, right? Which is I'm a world citizen, I'm world centric. And at the same time, right, I'm actually can be part of a community, right? We don't have to obliterate Judaism. I can be in the covenantal destiny, the unique destiny of the Hebrew wisdom lineage. I can be in the unique destiny of the Christ community. I can be in the unique destiny, of the Indian, the Indian, the subcontinent. I can be in the unique destiny, of being Chinese. I can be in the unique destiny of being the beauty of being a Black American. right? Actually, there's no melting pot. The melting pot was a mistake. It's a terrible metaphor, as both Baldwin and Mead pointed out. What does it mean to melt? To melt means you lose your essence and you become homogeneous, right? Right? So there's a part of that that's true. All of us are true self. We're all part of the one consciousness. We're all part of the one love. We're all part of the one heart. So therefore, universal human rights. Therefore, world-centric intimacy. Therefore, we're all holding hands, right? We get that? This is hugely important. We're all holding hands, right? Race is like hair color. And Black Lives Matter. And Jewish survival matters, right? And there's a unique self-symphony in every race, right? And every religion, right? And every nationality that prides itself on its home can actually have a unique instrument and unique self-symphony, right? So there's only one human race, but that one human race is not a globalist homogenizing, which erases difference, which erases distinctions. Everyone get that? So feel this. Can we feel this together? We actually have to hold this in our bodies. And remember what we said before, you've got to be able to inhabit two different perspectives, right? So in the one, I've got to hold paradox, hold dialectic. Thesis and antithesis produce a synthesis, okay? Thesis, you ready? Let's make it real now. Thesis, right? The original thesis is I'm defined by my religion. The Jews, they're the best chosen people, right? The whites, they're superior. The blacks, they're superior. The Indians, they're superior. The Sunnis, they're superior. The Shiites, they're superior, right? That was the thesis. Antithesis, that was a pre-modern thesis. The antithesis says, no, universal human rights. The Renaissance, Da Vinci, Marcello Ficino, right? Ultimately, Voltaire, remember the cruelties that were initiated by that thesis. There's an antithesis, right? It's a beautiful antithesis, which is universal human rights. Martin Luther King, the content of our character, not the color of our skin. Does everyone feel that? Right? Sam Harris, you got it right, Sam, right? Race is like hair color. That's the antithesis. Does everyone get this? Okay, does everyone get this? Okay. Now, synthesis, right, says, no, actually, we're completely beyond any kind of racism. We have no toleration for that. And therefore, we're beyond any kind of collective guilt, right? No collective guilt, right? No collective guilt. Kirsten's not responsible, right? And white Americans are not guilty, right, for slavery. Not true. Just like Germans aren't guilty for gassing my family, right? We're responsible, as Margaret Mead and James Baldwin agreed, right, for what we did. And that's the way we're responsible in that sense, right, for sure. And there's a way in which we're part of a community, and there's a covenant between generations in that community. And I want to introduce this idea. Often we talk about in the old religions a covenant between the human being and God, which is beautiful. But there's a second kind of covenant that's actually implicit in the lineage, which is a covenant between the generations. There's a covenant between generations. Does everyone get that? There's a covenant between generations. So there is intergenerational trauma, right, in the Jewish community. That's real. And there is intergenerational responsibility in the Jewish community. And I do feel, right, I'm a complete universalist. I'm a Buddhist, I'm a Christian, I'm a Muslim, but I also feel a unique responsibility, right, to the continuity of the Jewish community. And I feel a responsibility to the Jews of 2,000 years ago, right? And as a universalist, I feel a responsibility to the human beings of 2,000 years ago. But they don't contradict each other, right? And there's intergenerational trauma and intergenerational glory and intergenerational beauty. And there's a covenant between the generations. And so it's not collective guilt, but it's unique responsibility. So white America is not guilty for slavery. There was slavery all over the world. It was a tragedy in the world, and the United States participated in that world tragedy. It's not an evil or ugly American, right? There was slavery all over the world. Whites had slaves and blacks had slaves and brown people had slaves, black slaves all over the world. And black people had black slaves. It was a tragedy all over the world. There's been an evolution of consciousness, right? We who are living in the United States and we who came and immigrated to the United States. I'm a first generation American immigrant. I wasn't here. My family wasn't here. I had nothing to do with this. But as an American, and I'm an American, I'm proud to be American. As an American, by taking on being an American, right? right? Then I'm also taking on part of the collective responsibility of America in the covenant between generations, right, to heal the intergenerational pain. Can you feel that? Can you feel that, everybody? That's not a soundbite. You get that? That's not a soundbite. It's deep. Like there's a covenant between, who can hear that? Who can hear this? If you can hear this, just give a yes. Who can hear this, right? It's deep. There's no collective guilt. Right? There's not responsibility in the sense I'm being punished for what I didn't do, right? But there's a covenant between the generations, right? And we can actually feel the suffering across the generations, right? Remember we said you can get underneath the space-time continuum? Remember we said that before? Right? So actually, I can feel the suffering, right? I can feel the suffering of my relatives, right? A particular woman I'm thinking about in my family was holding her baby in her arms as she entered the gas chambers, right? And suffocated with her baby. 12,000 Jews a day gassed in Auschwitz. What does that mean? By the most cultured nation on earth. And I can feel, right, what it means to have lynchings of Black men who white women falsely accuse them, right, of some sexual impropriety, right, who were lynched, and then postcards of the lynched Black men were passed around in the white community, right? I can feel that. I can feel that horror. And that horror is alive on the streets today because there is intergenerational trauma. And that doesn't excuse rioting. It doesn't excuse looting. It doesn't excuse burning down your neighborhood, like happened in 1968 in Detroit and Chicago, which then actually wrecked the neighborhood and took the jobs away because the manufacturing left and caused untold disaster, right, for the Black community. That doesn't excuse that, right? Nor would it excuse it on the Jewish side, right? But I can feel Jewish pain through the generations, and I can feel Black pain through the generations. And every time we scream for every time we never screamed before. And every time we protest for every time we never protested before, right? Right, and so beyond what the statistics are, which need to be looked at, and beyond what's true, which needs to be looked at, because we need to do fact checking, we need to understand, right? But beneath all that, right, there's all the pain that we've never been able to hold and never been able to let go of, because it's still with us. And every time I'm traumatized, right, I get re-traumatized for all the old pain, and that's real. That's real. It can't be rationally dismissed. It's not a rational conversation, right? Right? Because ratio is ratio, right? It comes from music. It's the right relationship between things. The right relationship between things. Ratio actually means music, because mathematics is a form of music. So rational means I've got to feel the music. It means I've got to feel the pain. I've got to feel the pathos, right? And I've got to realize that there's a covenant between generations, and I'm responsible to set this right. I'm responsible to set it right for all the generations. And I'm responsible to feel pain beyond my pain, to feel pain to expand my circle horizontally. I got to feel beyond my community, but I've also got to feel beyond my generation. That's what leadership is. If we democratize greatness, you can't say, okay, the president, the vice president, right? There's a couple of people, they're the great people, and we're locked in our egoic selves. That's not Homo amor. Homo amor means we're all part of this covenant between the generations, right? And we can all feel each other's pain, and we can feel the pain through the generations. And I can be a Jew in the gas chamber, and I can be a Black slave on a plantation, right? I'm like, wow, right, wow, right, wow. Who can feel this? Who can feel it? If you can feel it, just say, I feel it. If you can feel it, just say, I feel it, right? Who can feel this? Can anyone feel this? Yeah, can you feel it? If you feel it, just say, I feel it. Just say, I feel it. Right? I feel it. Can you shout it out? Just feeling, just shout it out, I feel it. Right? We can feel it, right? It's not just thinking it, right? Ratio, rational, means to feel the music, right? 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 I can feel it. Right? I feel it, right? I can feel it. Right? I can't just think it. I can't just have talking heads, right? Talking and working it out. No, Dharma is to feel it. We can feel each other's pain, right? Right? We can feel each other's pain, and we don't explain it away. Right? We can say no looting. We can say no burning. That's absolutely right. We can say burn down your neighbor. It's utterly destructive. We can say that all the right. There's a lot we can say. Right? A lot we can say to the right, and a lot we can say to the left. But don't explain it away. Right? Feel it. Right? It's intergenerational pain. It's intergenerational trauma. Right? Because actually, we're not guilty for what came before, but we can feel everything that came before. Right? There's a covenant between the generations. And here's where it gets gorgeous, okay? Here's where it gets gorgeous. Here's the last thing, okay? Here's the last thing. Usually, we can only feel, at the ethnocentric level, people can usually only feel their own people's pain. You have a very hard time feeling the pain of other people, right? My mother used to tell me, right, if it's good for the Jews, it's good for the world, right? And she sent me Arthur Morse's book, which was about, well, 6 million died. At the silence, the deafening silence of the world during the Holocaust. And then I read David Wyman's book, The Abandonment of the Jews, which is about the deafening pain, right? While the Holocaust happened, when it could have been stopped in 1,000 different ways, and nothing was done. And the world stood by silently, right? And I used to repeat that in speeches in my 20s. And I would tell people about it all over the place. Right? And then one day, when I was 40, a woman stood up, a Jewish woman, right? And she started saying, repeating what I was saying about, how the world was silent, when the Jews were killed. And I realized as she was saying it, I realized why it rang hollow for me at that point. And I said to her, wow, I get it. You're so right. And I've been talking about this my whole life. And I said to her, and I'm so happy that you were an activist when Khmer Rouge, right, destroyed 2 million people in Thailand. And she looked at me, she didn't know what I was talking about. I said, I apologize. I'm sorry, I didn't mean that. I meant you've been a major activist for the Armenians who've suffered genocide. And she looked at me and I said, no, I apologize. I got it wrong. I forgot. You're leading, right? You're right. You were the person who jumped in when the Hutus were killing the Tutsis and, right, 800,000 people were killed in 100 days. You couldn't sleep at night, right? And she looked at me and she got angry. And I said to her, we can't just feel the pain of our lineage, right? Right? Homo, amor means we can feel each other's pain, right? Every person in Black Lives Matter has to say, oh my God, I was gassed in Auschwitz. And therefore I got to know what a Holocaust is. And therefore I can't write lightly and wrongly in the Black Lives Matter manifesto in 2016 that Israel commits genocide, right, in a Nazi-like way. You can't write that in the Black Lives Matter, right, manifesto, which the Black Lives Matter did. And it's not that Black Lives Matter activists even knew. It was written by a couple of people in a committee. But you can't do that. And if I'm in Black Lives Matter, I'm in Auschwitz, right? And if I'm Jewish, right, I'm on the plantation. I'm being lynched. I can't breathe from lynching, just like you can't breathe, right, from being gassed, right? It's not by accident that Abraham Joshua Heschel, the great Jewish master, marched next to Martin Luther King, right, in Selma, right? And the Catholics and the Protestants and the Jews and the Blacks and the Sunnis, right, and the Shiites, right? We got to move beyond. We actually are one world. We are one love. We are one heart, right? And we can feel each other. We don't melt, right? We're actually, each of us, gorgeous instruments, unique religions, unique races, right? Unique nationalities, gorgeous races in the unique self-symphony. But ultimately, we're part of one people and we're part of one heart and we're part of one love. And when we do sense making, it means we sense each other, right? We feel each other. It means we commit outrageous acts of love for each other, not just for our own people. Right? That each of us feels each other's pain and lets our hearts be ripped open by each other's pain. And we commit outrageous acts of love for each other. My child's your child and your child's my child. For real.